Hello and welcome. This is Matthias from mamoworld.com, and we are in part 6 of our tutorial series about how to program your own tools with automation blocks for After Effects. In the first 5 episodes, we already created this comprehensive script here that performs a lot of tedious tasks you need to perform usually when creating your project. So it sets up a folder structure, it creates these project bins here, imports some footage, and creates a new composition. So in particular, in the last part, we learned how to create a new composition and to create some guides in this composition. And in this episode, I want to talk about shape layers, how to add a background shape layer to your composition. So in order to create a new layer, we go to the AE layer category here and go here to create new layer. You see that by default, this creates a footage layer, but we can simply choose here a shape layer or a solid layer. And by the way, first, maybe I want to show you something simple, and this is creating a solid. So if you just are about creating a solid color layer, creating a solid is a little bit simpler with automation blocks. So let me quickly show you this. You just enter here layer name, say BG for background, enter here a size for it, and you can give it a color. Maybe let's go for a crazy pure red color and a default pixel aspect ratio of 1. If we run this, it creates a new project for us. And we get an error. And this is because it complains there is no active composition. Okay, we created this composition, but it's not currently active. Therefore, it could not create in the active composition this solid. So what we instead want to use is the composition that we created here. Yeah, and as I explained last time already, the new comp block here creates a variable myComp and stores the composition in that variable. And we already used it here to make sure that the guides are created in exactly this comp. So we can take in our variable category here, this variable myComp, and drag it here to make sure that the solid is created in this composition. If we run the script again, it recreates everything. This time it's done. And if we open our composition, you can see we've got this red solid with the name BG. Okay, so now let's see how this is working with shapes. So maybe to explain you what the problem with shapes is, let me show you what a shape layer actually looks like. When I create a shape layer here, you can see that it has a pretty complex content inside of this. Namely, in the contents of the shape layer, there's first a group, this rectangle 1, it's technically a shape group. And inside of this, you've got a path with all kinds of details, and you've got a stroke in this case, and you've got a fill. And now, with automation blocks, I decided to build automation blocks such that you can create all these components individually, such that you have full control to say, do you want to have it in a group? Do you really want a stroke or only a fill? And what kind of pass do you want? Maybe you want to have several passes here and then a stroke and a fill. So all these different components need to be created individually, and this makes the script just a little bit more lengthy than if you create a solid. So let's understand what we need to create. First, we need to create the layer. Then we need to create this group, then the rectangle path, and then a stroke or a fill, whatever we want. Okay, so let's go to automation blocks and first change this here to shape layer. We create a new shape layer. You can see that now the only parameter this has, apart from the comp where it should be created, is the layer name. And maybe we name it BG shape, background shape. If we run this script and take a look at the composition, you can see you've got this layer BG shape, and inside of it there is empty contents, no contents at all. So let's add some contents. For this, we don't need to add a new layer, but something in the layer. Yeah, there's also a block for this in the layer category, and this is this one here. This creates a new layer, and this adds something to a layer. By default, it adds an effect, but you can see you can also add masks or shapes. And if you decide to add shapes, you can have different kinds of shape components, so to speak, that you can add. Yeah, so you can add a rectangle path, ellipse path, different kinds of passes. You can also add a group. This is what we need here now. And you can also add here a stroke or a fill, or also a gradient, for example, if you like. Yeah, so we want to add a group first, and now this group itself needs to be created on a layer, so we need to put a layer here. If you want to hard code a layer, you could just select a layer here and then click this refresh button, and then this writes out here like a path, so to speak, describing exactly this layer. So this /myAwesomeProject says in the project item myAwesomeProject, this is this one here in the root folder, inside of this, and this is this colon thing here, says inside of this you want to access something. What do you want to access? BG shape, so the layer BG shape. This entire thing says in the composition myAwesomeProject, use the layer BG shape. Yeah, and you could tinker around with those names now or generate a text describing the layer you want, but it's much easier to just use this variable here. Yeah, when we create a new shape layer, it says create new shape layer as my layer, and in the same way as this said new empty comp as my comp, so the block will store the result in the variable my comp. Here, the layer that we created will be stored in the variable myLayer. We can maybe give it an even more descriptive name, so I rename it and say my shape layer, or maybe even my BG shape layer. In case our script has other shapes later, we can easily distinguish those. And now we have here this variable my BG shape layer, and you can just drag it here and put this block in the garbage to say please create this group in the layer that is stored in this variable. Okay, you can add here blending mode for the group, transform properties, but we keep all of those at the default. And next, inside of this group, we want to create some shape, or maybe let's first test how this is working. We run our script, it's done, and inside of our shape layer we now have a group 1. Yeah? Okay. Now, inside of this group, we want to create, let me duplicate this here. We want to create a rectangle path. And we also, let me duplicate this again, want to create inside of this a fill. Yeah? Now, for the rectangle path and the fill, we can adjust all those parameters like the size, 1920 times 1080. Position should stay in the center, and for the fill you can choose a color. Let's keep this nice red color here, and you can choose blending mode, etc., etc. There are two important things to understand now. Let's first start with a little easy thing that can be a bit nasty if you don't know what's going on, and this is if you want to change these values that consist of a list of individual values, due to some very technical little limitations, you cannot drag additional values on top of these individual components. What I want to say is, if you say, well, I don't want to hard code here 1920, but I want to calculate it. Namely, I want this to be exactly the width of the composition. Yeah, so I could just duplicate this. And now if you try to drag this here, it's somehow not working. But there is a simple workaround for this, and this is you have to add a new list here. So just take this. You can drag something on top of this entire argument here, but you cannot drag something on top of a little component of it. That's just how it is. The system is limited in that way, but no problem. We just drag a new list in here. And now I say here we take the width, and here we put the height of the composition. So now we make sure that this shape is always the same size as the composition itself, no matter how high and wide it is. Okay, this was the one thing you need to know about these parameters here. So when you try to drag blocks on top, always drag something on the entire parameter. You cannot drag on these individual components. And then the next thing you need to understand is we want to make sure that our rectangle paths and our fill are inserted not in the layer itself directly, but they should actually go into this group. Yeah. So if we run the script as is and check now our shape layer, you can see, oh, it seems to work. It looks good. Here's our red background. Yeah. And if you take a look at the contents, all of these three things are now at the same level. There's a group inserted in the layer, and the rectangle path inserted in the layer, and our fill. But what we actually wanted to have is that these two are inside of our group. Yeah. So if you want, I mean, if you say it's okay to have them at the top level, you can keep them like this. But if you want the same behavior that you get when creating a rectangle with this, namely having this contents inside of a group, then we need to change our script now such that it puts the, first creates our shape group, and then puts the rectangle path and the fill not inside of the layer, but inside of this group. Yeah? And for this we need two observations. The first is here we decide where we put it. So here, instead of putting the layer, we now need to put this group. And the second thing is the group itself, when we create it, is stored in a variable. It's stored in the variable my variable here. Yeah, this is not really a great name, so let me rename this variable and name this to shape group, or maybe my shape group. I always like to add a my to indicate this is something I created. So now the group is stored in my shape group, and we can use the my shape group and put it here and throw this in the garbage. So now the rectangle path is not inserted in the layer, but in this shape group. So far so good. We want the same here too. Now we've got only one problem, and this is here we say we add our group and save it in the variable my shape group. And if you look closely here, we say we add now our rectangle path, and we also save it in the variable my shape group. Yeah, this is just because we duplicated this block several times or took it here from the library, and it's by default using the same variable name. And now this means at this point, when this block creates a rectangle path, it overwrites the contents of my shape group. And when we next try to add the fill to it, it will not try to add it to this group, but actually to this path. Yeah? So therefore, we need to make sure that this here is actually using a different variable. Yeah. So let me quickly create two additional variables and say here this is my shape rectangle, and we create yet another one to say my shape fill. And now we make sure that when we create the rectangle path, we store this in the variable my shape rect, and if we create the fill, we store it in the variable my shape fill, so we don't overwrite anything. But both of those are created inside the shape group. Let's test the script now. And as you can see, we have here our shape layer with the contents, and now inside of the group we have these the rectangle paths and the fill. And now the cool thing about this is that you can change any properties of those later, accessing them with their variables. So if you say we don't like the name of this group 1, we want it to be a different name, yeah, we can now change the property of this. So what this technically now is, it's not the group here, it's not a layer itself, but it's a property inside of a layer. So we go here to layer properties, and now properties have attributes like properties that you can keyframe, have a value. Groups don't have values, yeah, but they also have other property attributes like names. And so we take this set attribute of a property. Well, which property do we want? We want the group. Where is it? My shape group. For this my shape group, I want to set the property as the attribute name, and I want to set this to background rect, for example. If we run this now, it recreates everything, and here now in our background shape, we've got in the contents the group background rect. Yeah, so I guess you start understanding now the structure of all of this a little bit more. So you've got a composition, you've got layers, and inside of layers you've got properties. So properties is everything that you find here. This is a property, this is a property, this is a property. All of these are properties. Yeah, and everything you can do with properties is found in this category here. And layers have attributes that you can get and set, and compositions have attributes that you can get and set, and also layer properties have attributes that you can get and set, and one of those attributes is the name, for example. Okay, that's the end of this class. In the next and last class, I have some final tips for you how to get help from the community and also from me when you write automation block scripts. And also, if you created some cool scripts, how you can share those with the community. Again, I'm Matthias from mamoworld.com, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next class.